And so clearly the way of thinking about command and control wasn't going to work when you think about system change at that level. And I really was feeling pretty clear that the top management books weren't giving us enough. So what I want to do with you this afternoon is I want to share with you one model. We'll show a video about it, and then we'll do an experiential exercise to help you understand the model in your body. And then we'll walk through some concrete tools and techniques that I have found that can be helpful in teaching yourself to think more systematically in terms of systems that can't be controlled. When Kevin and I talked about this, we thought, well, we could have it really focus at the individual level, since so much of this program is that, but that actually, in the management and leadership roles that we imagine for you, we want you to be able to be effective in the organizations that you work in. And also the action learning projects obviously are part of that. So one of the exercises I built for you is to apply one of the tools to your action learning project. And for that, I'm actually going to want you to sit and find one member of your circle that you just came from to help you kind of debrief that exercise. So we've got a lot to go through. Any questions before I start? Before we dive into the model and then give you a couple ways to see it? Okay, so the best, smartest thing that I have found to help me understand systems is this little diagram that's on the PowerPoint. It's created by a guy, Snowden, in Boone. I put their Harvard Business School article up on the Moodle site for today. I also, by the way, put up a video that's my friend Chris Corrigan doing a teach on the theory U. So if any of you still want to dive into that, today I was looking around and I put that up on today's session as well. But there's a little Harvard Business Review article you can read. Basically what Snowden is a Welsh guy, and he created this thing called the Connected Framework. And to me, why I think it's really helpful is it gets to Dave Duxbury's point that not everything is complex systems. And it also helps us to think about, well, if we are in different kinds of contexts, how do we act? How do we try to intervene as a leader to move things along? So let me just orient you here. There are really 5 different domains. These ideas came out of knowledge management. And there are the complex and chaotic domains where it is unordered. Things are happening in a way that is unordered. You have complicated and simple systems where things are ordered. And then you have here a situation where there's disorder. So in our lives, there are times when our life is completely disordered, right? Which is a little bit different than chaos. Because chaos is really a situation where you can go in, you can try and rapid response and change the chaos, and then move it into a different kind of system. And in a minute, this is all going to be a little bit more concrete, but I want to just go through the model in a second. So most of the time, we are taught in elementary school, primary education, that the world is a simple system, that there is a direct relationship between cause and effect. And many systems operate that way. The electrical system in this building, cause and effect. You turn on the light, you turn off the light. Right? And in simple systems, you do something, you get something else. There's one good answer about how to wire this building. Right? It's not like it's up for debate. Electricians have found out how to do that. There is a best practice in electrical wiring. And the way you solve problems is you do some analysis, sensing, what is the diagram, what is the dimensions of this room, categorizing what is the electricity needs you'll need in this room, and then installing the wiring. Easy to understand. So some of you come out of fields where most of the problems that you are confronting are simple. You know how to lay wiring, you know how to set up a Wi-Fi network, you know how to develop or use medication for animals when they're sick, because the research has been done. Other systems are complicated, and these are systems that are ordered, that you have to push a little bit to figure out cause and effect, but it is knowable. So a lot of the statistical techniques that we're starting to teach you in analytics are really focused on understanding complicated systems. So we will get to, probably by the end, a technique of regression analysis called multivariate analysis, where you take a lot of different variables and you put them in a line and you say, what is the cause of early childhood poverty when you look at things like marital education, family size, age at which the child was born for the mother. And social science has really developed a lot of information and a lot of techniques for helping us understand complicated systems, where there is still a causal relationship between childhood poverty and those other variables. But it takes some techniques to try to figure that out. And in that kind of system, you also start by sensing what is the nature of the phenomena that we're trying to understand. You analyze the data to figure it out, and then you make a recommendation. So in some ways, the logic of the Bardak book is assuming that much can get done in systems when we understand the problem, analyze the data, and make a recommendation for action, right? And yet yesterday, as we were talking about, we all know that a policy memo in and of itself isn't the thing that's actually going to get enacted into law. And that's because public policy making is actually not a complicated system, it's a complex system. But in a minute, I'll get there. The one other thing I want to say is in complicated systems, experts are very important, because they can analyze what does the literature tell us about the consequences of childhood poverty, and bring that into the debates and the discussion about the best public policy response. And you try to really go for good enough practice. Well, the logic in the way of intervening in systems that are ordered is very different than in systems that are unordered, okay? And by unordered systems, I mean that there are different things happening, but there is no way to predict what is going to unfold. And that concept is really what has been occupying a lot of different scientists, social scientists, in the last 15 to 20 years, driven in part by world events, given in part by innovation that we never imagined in things like the internet. Right? The internet is an infrastructure to support the development of unordered systems, the network. It emerges and grows where there's energy and attention and investment in terms of the content that's included. So in complex systems, well, maybe I'll start with chaotic. In chaotic systems, something will happen and there is no response. Something else will happen and there is no response. There is a lack of understanding of what is going on, an incoherence, if you will. And many times when you are in a chaotic system, the thing you have to do as a leader is to reduce the chaos and help people understand some kind of pattern. So you analyze what's going on, you sense how to act, and then you respond. Okay? So that you are trying to just shift the dynamic of the system. In complex systems, and this is one that I've really been drawn to because it mirrors to me so much of what happens in public policy. You probe the system. You do something to see how it responds. You then see what happens, and then you develop an intervention. And we'll be talking about, throughout our time together, complex systems. But in this kind of environment, you have to do some of the things we've been talking about the whole semester. You have to improvise. You have to be able to see what the moment requires of you and be able to move into it. So I want to show you a quick little video that will communicate the nature of this model in 3 minutes much better than I have in the last 10, using a metaphor and an analysis. Oh, sorry. Why is that?
Let's imagine.
What is the season? Middle? Yes. Nope.
Yeah.
The brown area in the middle is the disorder.
Let's imagine, if you can, that you've got to organise a party for a bunch of 11-year-old boys, and you want to apply the 3 different types of system that apply in nature. Well, if you assume the party is chaotic, the children are acting at random, you might as well buy the drugs and alcohol so the children can go on a personal experience of self-discovery. Burn down in the process, but what does that matter? All property is theft and it was socially constructed in the first place. I have friends in California who've tried this. I don't recommend it. The recovery cost is high, but it's a legitimate approach. On the other hand, the one we'll be more familiar with is the order system approach. Here, it's of critical importance to construct clearly articulated learning objectives in advance of the party itself. The learning objectives should, of course, be aligned with the mission statement for education in a society to which you belong. Ideally, you should print the learning objectives off on motivational posters, pictures of eagles soaring over valleys and water dropping into ponds. Place those around the room where you're going to hold the party. You then produce a project plan for the party. The project plan should have clear milestones throughout the party against which you can measure progress against ideal party outcome. Once you've done that, the senior adult can start the party with a motivational videotape. After all, you don't want the children wasting time in play which isn't aligned with the learning objectives of the party itself. And then they should use PowerPoint to demonstrate their personal commitment to the objectives of the party and to show the children how pocket money is linked to the achievement of the milestone targets. Of course, the third approach, the complexity approach, is even simpler. Here we draw a line in the sand known as a boundary in complexity theory, and we turn to the children and say, cross that, you little bastards, and you can't. One of the things you learn pretty fast as an adult is the value of flexible, negotiable boundaries, because rigid boundaries have a habit of becoming brittle and breaking catastrophically. We then use catalytic probes, and I'm deliberately using the jargon of complexity theory now. Football, a videotape, a barbecue, a computer game, something which will stimulate a pattern of activity which is called an attractor. And if it's a beneficial attractor, we stabilize it, we amplify it. If it's a negative attractor, we dampen it or destroy it very quickly. So what we do is we manage the emergence of beneficial coherence within attractors, within boundaries. And in that simple phrase, we see the promise of complexity theory for organizations and government alike.
Yeah.
Vigilance of beneficial coherence within attractors, within boundaries.
Okay, so can we see that?
Yep.
So what's important about that phrase? What do people say there? Kathy, did you, what did you say? Did you say anything? Somebody on that table said something that I want to hear. The first most important thing, I think, is actually understanding that systems have boundaries. Okay. We have a boundary in our learning community. What is it? Ethics.
The people who are here.
And how do we get the people here?
You have to pay. Well, we all came voluntarily, didn't we?
You came voluntarily, you had to pay. What else?
You registered.
You registered. There's a structure of our meeting.
Particular space.
There's a particular space.
And to get accepted.
The schedule. So there are things that are set up to bound this learning system. That's what he means. The birthday party. You draw the line in the sand, and if they step over it, the kids can't go to the garage and start the automobile, right? In the birthday party. It's a boundary. We do it so naturally we don't even think about it. The beneficial coherence. At a birthday party is the kids having fun. What's the beneficial coherence that we've created in this system?
We learn
How?
from each other.
How else?
Reading.
How else?
Reflection.
But think about when you do the initial reading reaction, for example, there's a lot of divergence in opinion. And part of what we try to do when this system's brought together is we try to do a series of experiences so that there can be a greater coherence, a greater convergence of your learning in this system. If we created the learning experience like it was constructed for many of us in undergraduate, we would fail. Because there is no way in God's green earth you would come to campus twice a month and be lectured at. So we have to create and manage the coherence in a different kind, with a different kind of technique. So in working in systems, part of what we have to learn is to develop new kinds of skills. And sometimes it's difficult because, as he talks about, in those ordered systems, we work in jobs where we are all trained to be grown-ups and professionals using a set of tools, PowerPoints, mission statements, etc., that's whole purpose is to reduce complexity, even though that complexity may exist, and it may in fact not be created towards resolving the kinds of problems that our organizations or systems really confront. Dave?
Yeah, how do you manage the emergence of something? I'm trying to get my arms around that whole concept. And I mean, I know that you're maybe managing the emergence of our experience as a professor for the class. So is that what that means? I mean, or is that what he's talking about when he said managing emergence?
Yes. Do you want to respond?
Well, yeah, because I wonder if this connects to the part of the presence that one of the parts that I liked was about creating the container, and I like that because it's like creating the container, setting some boundaries and things like that, and then emergence happens. Like that's it's like the dialogue is driven by having the right, setting certain boundaries and setting certain kind of parameters in certain simulations, and then our dialogue takes off and probably moves in a very different way than maybe you two planned, and it's about following that kind of natural form that emerges, and the balance between too much structure and not enough.
Another way to look at it, I mean, as a veterinarian, you manage the emergence of calves being born. So if calves can plop out on the ground, out in the field, it has one outcome. Or if a calf comes out within a more managed environment, it has another outcome.
You just naturally change your practice given those different scenarios. Okay? So that's a great illustration.
I was going to say managing the emergence of our active learning projects is about the small group work, the one-on-ones with you, the posting our updates, and the kind of email conversation that happens from time to time around that. So you don't know where you're going to land in the end with your project, but you're doing things to kind of inspire the progress.
Yes, and that's a great example as well. So if you think about how some of you began with Gantt charts and timelines, right? And at least in the group that I saw in December or in November, not very many of you followed that, right? Because things have shifted and changed, and we have been encouraging you to manage the emergence. For some of you, that's very easy. For others of you, it creates great anxiety. Because is this really something for school? Am I really achieving the objectives that I set out for school? Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even for yourself, I mean, we had to do a goal setting or an initial intent.
And in the part of the complex systems is not a chaotic system. Okay, so think about where he starts. Chaotic system with the birthday parties, give them drugs and alcohol. A complex system has factors in the action learning project, I would say, are threefold. One is, you don't want to look like an idiot in front of your circle mates. Second of all, you don't want to look like an idiot when you get up at the end of the semester and talk in front of your colleagues. And third of all, you don't want to fail. So that those parts in the system create incentives for behavior. But we are not mandating a set of activities because leadership doesn't work that way. We are mandating a set of activities in the policy analysis segment of the course, right? And in the analytics set of the course.
Well, the ground rules too, that
They help create some of the boundaries as well. And again, the leader can write up the ground rules, or what we did is we co-created the ground rules. So I want to have you get up, and we're going to have an experience of multiple kinds of systems, and I'm going to be the person creating the boundaries. What I would invite you to do is to see our seeing, as they said in present. So go through this, but both witness what you're doing and witness what's going on in the system. Okay, so just stand up. So as we go, the rules are going to be the same, which is that don't touch each other and don't talk. Okay. So I'd just like you to start walking around the space, looking at things, but moving somewhat rapidly. You can walk a little faster. Move around the space. Okay, now I'd like you to move around the space following my directions. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. Okay, now I'm going to add two more activities. Keep walking. And when I say these words, I need you to do them. Stop. Start. Jump. Stop. Start. Jump. Stop. Start. Lunge. Lunge. Jump. Start. Stop. Jump. 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 Lunge. Okay, now I'm going to say those same words, but you need to do different things when I say them. So, I'm gonna, you could maybe just practice these two additional movements. Jump, skip. And jacks, jumping jacks. So, stop. When I say start, you need to stop. When I say jump, you need to lunge. When I say stop, you need to skip. And when I say lunge, you need to do jacks. Jump. Stop. Lunge. Stop. Lunge. Jump. Stop. Now I need you to stop, pause, and I need you to look around our system and find two people. Doesn't matter who it is. But we're going to go back to start and stop in the first thing. But when you stop, you need to position yourself so you are equal distance between the two people. Okay, so just start walking. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. Stop. Start. Stop. Okay, pause. Let's figure out what's going on here.
Please, Bill.
So,
we were looking for two key people? No, okay,
and you had to be equal distance between them when you stop, or adjust yourself. when you do. So somebody said Marina is very popular. How many people had Marina as one of their attractors?
I'm fine, two people are, put myself.
Who did you have?
I had these two.
And who did you have?
These two, but only the last time I didn't know.
I changed every time I saw
I did that the first
Let's do
time.
it again.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that was hard, guys.
Okay, actually, let's do this last one in a minute. Let's go back to the first walk around. When you started to walk, we were in a disordered system. You were just walking. You were just walking. How did it feel like just to walk?
Nice.
You knew the space. There was no big problem. And then we went to a simple system where I said stop and go. Stop, start, stop, start. How was that? Easy. Predictable. Predictable. And then what happened when I added jumping and lunging?
That was fun.
Became a complicated system.
But more fun. I'm enjoying it. Somebody said I wasn't gonna do it.
And it's easy to keep it in your head. But what about when I added the two additional ones and then you had to do a different thing than the directions?
Stop and go was easy because it was the opposite when we started
I looked to other people.
Yeah.
I looked to other people because I couldn't remember any of them.
And even if they weren't doing it right.
I still did it. Right.
Right, so think about that. This is actually very significant what's being said. It was a chaotic system. There's too much information to keep in your head. It is like the welfare system I was that we're trying to intervene in. It's chaos. So what do you do in chaos? You follow the people around you. Are they doing the right thing?
Don't know. Yeah.
You don't know. You just are trying to figure out what do I do. So you turn to other people and you mimic what they're doing, even though that might not be what's desired by public policy, by the supervisors, by anything else. Now, let's do the complex system, and I will be clearer with my instructions. Pick two people right now in your head.
Right now in your head.
Keep them. Doesn't matter who they are. And every time throughout this experience, you keep those two people. I will stay, maybe I'll make it even more interesting. We'll say start and go, we'll say skip and jump. Okay?
Wait.
What? Yeah, I'm still keeping my people.
So pick your people.
But when we have to be equidistant from them. only
When I
we
say stop. Okay?
Yeah. well,
So if I say skip, skip. If I say jump, jump.
Right.
But then when I say stop, you have to adjust yourself in relation to the two other people. Okay?
Oh, wherever they are. in the world.
Wherever they are.
Keep them the same.
Right.
And you keep
As
the
long as
same
you're in
people.
between them.
In between.
And you have to be in between them
Oh,
When
right.
you stop.
when we stop.
Same distance.
Same distance as you can.
I have a bad knee, so I might not actually be skipping.
Okay,
I can do the fake skip.
so start.
That's a lie.
Jump. Jump. Start. Stop. Start.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, so.
Lincoln's got one.
Start. Okay, just pause. Okay. So, what was going on in the room?
Kinetic energy.
Keeping an eye on my TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flashing.
Then we have clumping, frustration.
I was afraid I was gonna get the new.
Readjusting.
And then we couldn't move, we couldn't.
Yeah, hard to move forward.
Because you were clumped?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I stayed way out of the home, because I figured equidistant, I can be as far away from people as I want, and just have to be equidistant. And so I would watch my two people, I picked people with red shirts on, I would watch them in the home, and just, I mean, I was thinking, that's breathing where they go.
No?
No, just be equidistant from it.
No.
That's all right, that's how I interpret it too.
I thought you had to be as close to them as
Interpretation, yeah.
So in terms
If
of.
everybody would have stayed, we would have stayed.
If you just, only go around in circles or something, then we would have just stopped and we wouldn't have moved anymore.
Watching from the outside, I would just say every shape was different.
Yeah.
Like once you finally got adjusted, it was different, which is what the outcome emerges differently depending on the configuration of the elements in the system. You can't predict it from time one to time two. Talk about the frustration.
You couldn't get to where you needed to be to follow the rules. I mean, because people kept moving. And so as they moved, you had to move. So you and Laura, where's Laura now, were like either right together or completely far apart. And there was no way that I could keep up with both of them.
So you're constantly repositioning.
You're
The system in a flux.
Moving
In
target,
flux,
changing
yeah.
goals.
Yeah, even when you had your correct target, someone else would just come right between you or move your person away, so then you had to constantly change what you were doing, even if you had it right. It didn't matter.
Well, because you only had it right for 1 second.
Yeah. But I also, I mean, you know, you kept sight on the fact that you had two people, but at one point I realized, I mean, it struck me that I was somebody's, maybe, somebody's person. But that didn't, I wasn't thinking about me, even though we were all doing the same thing, I could only think about.
So who had her as their person? Okay. This is a big point of complex systems. We are so used to thinking about who is the authority structure that we have to orient ourselves to. We so rarely think that we are the authority structure that people are orienting to us.
Right.
And in thinking about problems in a complex way, you never, people say you never know how you impact other people. You never knew how you were impacting other people. And so it is an awareness, and that's why this kind of stuff that some of you felt very frustrating in Presence or in Parker Palmer about like knowing yourself and being really clear how you're showing up. It's in part this. You never know how you are role modeling, making somebody cynical, making somebody inspired, creating that frustration or not.
So nobody had Emily.
Did anybody have Emily?
I thought about that, because I was like, I'm standing way out here and waiting for everyone to figure out where they're at, and then I'm gonna move and by myself. So then I started trying to move at least with the group as the group was moving, instead of just waiting for everyone to figure out their
It would have been
position.
easy to follow though with a hat on.
I had Tanae and Sue because they had bright, easy colors to watch, but Tanae and I were about to
I noticed
smack
in the-
down there. I think this is the.
Online soup. Don't let anybody come between.
I know.
I noticed in the complicated and simple, we conformed more to each other. There were actually paths that we walked through more often. We kind of segregated into lanes, whereas the chaotic and complex was more oddly distributed.
There's more competition too.
more competition, and you couldn't be as passive in the process. You had to be constantly adjusting yourself in the complex or chaotic.
Yes, so in the complicated and the simple, it's, what you just said is another way of saying, there's an order to it. It's an ordered thing. You know, even though it's like you're jumping, you're skipping, like, it's, once you're like, I know how to do this, it's how most of us learn to be in elementary school. Oh, we line up, okay, line up, I know how to do that. But this complexity takes more energy. It takes more energy to think. And remember, at some point, I said stop, and about a minute later, somebody giggled and said, I think she said stop, because you kept on moving, right? But I will also point out that in this complex system, I didn't see what I saw in the chaotic one. In the chaotic one, I saw many people. I'm not gonna even try. Or I'm just gonna do what my neighbors do, because I don't know, I can't remember all these things. I would offer that I think that's the way people really are often in public bureaucracies. I'm not even gonna try to figure this out. It's insane, right? And if you're in a chaotic system, you get what? Fatigue, demoralized.
Apathy.
In the complex system, it wasn't that it was easy, but boy, there's a lot of giggling.
That was the skipping and the jumping one.
No, that was this last one with
Oh, right.
with the people you were orienting in relation to.
We really each had one job.
You each had one job, the
And we were
roles,
working.
the boundaries were clear.
And we were working, continually working to achieve what we wanted, achieve our goal, which was our mandate, which was to stay equal.
Because we all believed we could.
I think everybody was engaged. Except for everyone on a mission.
Yeah.
And we was just like, I'm out.
She wasn't, but she had a plan.
No, she had a
Yeah.
different perspective.
Well, I think with time, we would have become more clear with how it worked. I think we're all still kind of figuring out how it worked. I think that's very true anymore. We need relational.
And figuring out the leaders too.
Yeah,
Decisioning
no talking
yourself
rule is a big
in
part of it.
Yeah.
Like, if we've been able to talk, I mean, I would have said, hey guys, it's way easier if
Yeah.
you don't
Just line up.
stay, if you're not in the middle, but there was no talking allowed. So there was no way to communicate what your plan was, what someone else's plan was, what was working for them, what wasn't working for them.
Right, and to Joan's point, if we were practicing in this kind of thing for a long time, at some point, somebody would look over at Emily and be like, she's not moving. And then figure, maybe, you know, the system would learn.
Yeah.
The system would learn. You were waiting for it?
I was kind of waiting for us to figure some stuff like that out. Even early on in the, you know, are we gonna follow the leader? You know, are we gonna all decide that if we're 3 feet away? I was waiting for us to figure that out as a group.
And what were you waiting for?
A leader, kind of, but I was thinking, how do you do the hand signals or something? How do you figure that out?
I was waiting for an emergent practice.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Why didn't you offer the emergent practice?
I didn't know what it would be. I was trying to think of it, but I couldn't think of it.
Emily had one.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
everybody
Emily
was
did, right.
a lot of people were walking around in like a track, like in the same direction, so I was like, I'm gonna walk the opposite way, and, you know, you notice a lot of people at the beginning immediately went into the same walk pattern.
What was the opposite word of the field? The field and the what? In presence. What was that other word?
Yeah, there was the field. I remember field, I don't remember that.
So there was the impact.
Where's described, did you just, one of the two of you responded to my paper about the field
Versus the something else. What was the other word?
Saturday afternoon.
Yes, you were the field.
Okay,
This was the field,
okay.
okay? Just a second, but you want to say something?
Well, I should bring it up, but I viewed just the opposite of which one of these that we were doing was complex versus which one of these was chaotic. For example, I believe the very last thing we were doing was a chaotic example. I think the previous one, like I said, was complex, i.e. when you change, if you jump, I want you to do this. And the point is that was a complex thing where you gave us a rule set. But if we all had that rule set, it would be easy to execute. We just couldn't remember it. If we read down, the point is it was a very complex thing, but there was a way to actually accomplish it, as opposed to chaotic. There really was no way to accomplish it. You weren't really ever going to get it. I mean, my version of what I would call chaotic, which was the last thing. There really was no way to ever get that right. And that is what a chaotic system is. It'll never be the same result at the end, like you said. We start one way, but in the end you all end it differently 3 different times. That is a chaotic system. Chaos theory is exactly that. About where you start from, and it'll be a different end point. You can't predict the point based upon anywhere in the middle.
You get the last one, so.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I view, and I didn't want to throw more confusion into the discussion, so I decided I'd just.
So this is an important distinction, because in complex systems, there is an order. It's just not apparent until afterwards. When, I mean, in this case, I said, the order is, you're gonna follow 2 people and get between them. So there is an order in that when you look backwards, you can say, that is what was helping to organize our relationship. So that's why we did it over, because without that, it would have been chaos. So when people were shifting every single time their reference points, that is something that can't at all be understood afterwards. So there's a lot of reading about, a lot of talking about how do you analyze complex systems afterwards. The other thing is the people you were in reference to are called strange attractors, okay, in the theory. How many of you had Dave as one of your people? Okay. How many of you had Lori? Okay. How many of you had Tanae? Okay. So, think about that. Dave, Tanae, and Lori all had bright colors. Okay. But more people had Dave. Tick is his strange attractor. Maybe bright color. He's also a tall white guy. Right? I love tall white men. I don't have a tall white husband, but I have a white male husband. And one of the things that is important to point out is that sometimes the strange attractors in systems reflect the power balance of a society. Yep. Okay? So it's not that it's all like we're all equal and it's all, you know, I mean, you could have picked anyone, and his first theory was, well, it's a bright color. Well, I've got 3 people here with bright colors on, and there was more attention to him. Okay? I don't know if that's what caused it, but I've done this exercise in a number of groups, and the taller, the white guy with the bright color, so that those 3 things seem to be something that people pick often.
That wasn't my convention.
Not consciously, perhaps.
No, it was because there's 2 people right there and just start following everybody.
My other guy was me.
The closest when you start, right?
Exactly.
Which is what I did.
Yeah.
I was just going to throw out, it's making me chuckle because you've probably seen on the web like data visualizations that basically do this, lots of points that are equals to power. In software development, eventually you end up having to build one of these. You always start out thinking, this is an easy problem, I just tell each point to be the same distance from each other. And you do it, and everything keeps jiggling. You're like, oh yeah, I'll add this rule, and then everything sort of misbehaves, and you sort of build this complex rule set, and you realize it's never going to work by adding rules, and you start all over and design a completely different thing. But it's basically this same problem. That's
Interesting.
I think that one thing that I noticed is like, this was an iterative process. For the first time, I had 2 rules that were wrong compared to what to others. Like, I didn't know that I was supposed to pick the same 2 people, so that changed. And then I heard in between, which those 2 terms have been used interchangeably in the description, and so that rule is like, oh, I was trying to be in between, which forced me into the center.
Right.
And I think that if we did it again, it's like, I know I need the same 2 people, and it's equidistant. Then I think that then that emergent process comes out because the rules are something that we all understand. And I think that that's part of, for me, understanding emergent properties, is that you have to have the container, the critical mass, and the rules that everybody gets. And then you see self-organization and things that happen in that way. So I think that if we did it a 3rd time, now definitely, I think that it would be a totally different process as a result of that. But I think that that's the humanness of it. You know, if it's a computer, that's one thing that people, at least for me, I might interpret things differently. Maybe those two terms, they could be really
For me, instead of rules, I would use communication. It's really key to clear communication and understanding.
Yeah.
I think too, along the same lines I was thinking that, but shows that you get too goal oriented, we get our blinders on and don't see what Emily saw at 12. There's something a little easier, because we were all just like, first thought was get in between, or whether it was planted there or whatnot, who knows, but when you say equidistant, most of us probably went to smack dab in the middle, like that's where it's supposed to be, and didn't have time to communicate or talk, and, okay, is there another way?
But if we all did what Emily did, what would have happened?
What would have happened?
Yeah, what would have happened?
Yeah.
Cola was just saying, if you use geometry,
Well, no, you just end up like, the same thing happens, you end up with like a point that is, you know, a distance away,
Yeah.
because it's trying to solve the same issue, or all your points end up on top of each other, you know, and then you have a rule to say, well, you have to be this far apart, and then things start, exact same thing, like, that's why I was laughing, like, I literally hit go and see the exact same thing.
Just little dots. Except in the systems, things like gender, race, size matter. Not because they really matter, but because we're used to being in systems where that has some kind of meaning.
Well, I was gonna say, I think if we kept doing it, we'd all have the right, same communication, even the way that we were doing it, if we kept doing it, like, I was learning how my two people acted. So I was modifying my behavior based on, okay, you know, Kendra always seems to be on the left, or she's moving really fast, or she's not moving as fast, or she seems to be on the outside, or the inside, and so then I could tailor my equidistantness. So I was getting to my answer faster because I was learning about my 2 points, who are learning about their 2 points. So there's another layer of what you learn, not just that the system is doing, but like how to get to it faster.
but in my world, this is a lot like my world.
Yes, it is.
Like community organizing, politicians, policymakers, government agency staff, you never will come to the right answer. You have to accept that at some point. And there are magical moments when things align up and stuff happens, but it's like being able to know how to step out, look at it, go back out like the dance floor.
But I think that what you guys were doing in the middle, that was all cramped and people were elbowing each other and all of that, I do think it would have spread out a bit. So maybe
There's no wrong or right way is what I'm saying.
No, right, but I don't necessarily think there's a answer at the end either, but I think the way that we were doing it, we would have gotten better at what we were doing.
But then someone would have had to go to the bathroom.
So maybe
Something like that could have.
So maybe to break out of the chaos, we have to have rule breakers. Somebody who is gonna step out there and say, forget it, I'm not. But she still followed the rules, but she's still trying to stay in between her people. Or not in between, equidistance.
You need people who can see the pattern
Yeah,
and make a conscious choice.
yes. Yep.
See the pattern and make a conscious choice.
And getting on the balcony, like Joan said, this would be a great time to do that.
So on this, they say, sense what's going on, right? They probe what's going on, sense how to respond, and do so. Okay, and that's what we're gonna go through. How do you probe, how do you sense, how do you respond? You wanted to jump. Huh? You wanted to jump in next. No, I didn't. I had your hand up like.
Should go back.
She had to go back.
I was saying, when you said somebody had to go back. So I have a question. So if you're working within a system like this, it has a lot of rules and you could make the argument that it's becoming chaotic because of the rules. People are unable to remember exactly what they're supposed to be doing, so they're just sort of kind of doing what the person next to them is doing. At some point, and this kind of goes back to what Colin said, like, aren't you charged with sort of blowing up the system altogether and saying, like, well, this is clearly not accomplishing the intended goal, or it's become so complex that unless you are the writer of all of these rules, you're not actually going to know how to navigate them. And maybe even if you do, like, you have to keep reviewing your own work. So it just becomes an impossible system. I mean, isn't that sort of the, you know, and I feel like that's what we're really bad at. I mean, we get really like connected and I don't know, we just have a hard time saying, you know what? We've lost vision of and sight of what we are trying to accomplish here, and let's blow it up and let's start over.
But what happens when we blow it up and start over? I mean, I've dealt with that a lot, and like neighborhood organizations go through that cycle a lot. They burn their relationships so bad. But then they lose all that memory, that historical community memory of how to work with each other. What happened before that worked well, what happened, who are the right people to talk to. So my personal belief is if you blow it up and start all over again, you're kind of in chaos or the dark ages for quite, and people can stumble around in that for a long time.
Well, then maybe that's the wrong term. Then maybe collectively as a group, you decide, I want to change this. It's not one person making a decision to blow it up and fracturing, you know,
You have to have
collective
something to
learning and
replace it.
relationships, but deciding together, like, you know, this system is too difficult for us to navigate together. Let's create a new system so that we don't have to work so hard.
Well, and one of the things that was embedded in what Colin said was, and the research on this is real clear, actually, the simpler the rules, the simpler the structure, often the more health of the system. We see this in biologicals. There's some rules. Some animals eat some animals, right? But the simpler the rules, the more the system can operate in a way that makes sense. And we often in public policy, because we assume it's simple, and we can control it, we create structures that don't help. So, let's go back first.
You have to jump along the way.
Lunches.
Jodi, you have a really interesting idea of making it simple, because in my experience, so often, systems trying to account for the circumstances in which the simple system fails, and then and making it more complex as you go along until it just becomes impossible again. It's like,
Well, it's like, do you want to serve all the people okay, or do you want to serve 90% of the people really well?
right.
And then the things you have to do to serve that extra 10% actually make things worse for the.
I think about the work that I'm in, and oftentimes that is a question of life and death. I mean, you know,
You make the wrong decision.
yeah, you know, or it'll be a death. That sparks the conversation of like, well, we had a system failure. How do we prevent this from happening again?
Right.
And you end up making the system so complex that it's really hard to navigate. But then it's like, you know, how do you make a decision to say, well, we can't make it simple because people will die. I mean, like, I mean.
So this
How
is
do you
the
make a
stuff,
person
this
make that?
question is why there are all these books. Okay? And this question will be the question of our professional life. I truly believe. And frankly, it's going to depend completely on whether or not people have the courage in public affairs systems to say, how can we make this more simple? How can we make this actually serve the target group that we're saying, rather than just employ a bunch of professionals to do a study, to do a needs assessment, to do a blah blah blah, to do a blah blah blah, to do a blah blah blah. Another task force to create a report that nobody's going to use, but symbolically it makes us feel like we're doing something to respond to the challenges.
And you can get
Is
the
there a
grade
way
for it.
Is there a way to take the math and the science and apply it to people? I mean, they do write software programs for chaos theory and fuzzy theory and all that crazy stuff. So the airplanes, you know, all that. So is there a way that we can take the hard sciences and apply it to social situations?
I think that is what many of these books are trying to do.
Okay.
And I think we're at the beginning of doing that well, knowing what are the right tools to do that well. Because of course, people aren't just the dots who can program. You have things like projecting onto races and genders and classes and everything, right? When I was thinking about this in my own work, I would have prepared to walk through probing, sensing, responding, and as I was doing so, I realized, goofy enough, I think probing is really connected to that downward part of the U. If I probe something, if I do something, what happens? So the science of this, they always will do complex system maps with rabbits, and they'll add rabbits or add the way rabbits reproduce. That's a probe. The sensing is kind of the presencing or seeing what happens. And then the R is responding, figuring out what to do. And one of the things I would say is that the most important thing that the science would tell us to do, Sue, is to engage the system. And you have been experiencing different techniques, different technologies for engaging the system the whole semester. Okay? The circle, the World Cafe. This thing called open space technology, which we will do. Storytelling. The dialogues you do in your circles. That is how you get a sense, you probe the system, see what's going on. What that means concretely is right now in work that I'm doing, this welfare project, we're going in and we're doing site visits with local offices and going to probe what is going on in that system and to introduce alternative ways of thinking about things. Introduce the idea that maybe we could make it more simple. But then there are also other little techniques you can use. And so I wanted to show some examples of ways we're trying to probe the system. Yesterday we talked a lot about the heart and mind and having a probe in a system that touches both the analytics and the heart. And so that you can have that kind of change. And so in this particular project, what we have done, I want to find Dave's system, a lot of different techniques. We developed persona. There's been research done in the Minnesota welfare system to get a sense of the ages, the races, the genders, what are the scenarios that the people encounter. And what we did is we created 3 stories. So they're based on representative people in the client population. And we wrote stories about them. So the stories themselves are made up. But Maria here, we have written a story about her and her husband and their 2 children and coming out of work. Hani is a Somali refugee who has a bad back, came with her husband, and her husband recently died. And Julie is a young woman who has struggled a lot with chemical dependency, and her 2 kids have been in and out of the child welfare system. And we, in the systems work we do, we actually tell their stories. We have photographs of them up in the room. And when we are doing systems planning, we are trying to do it in relation to these probes. It's an attempt to remind people in their heart why they are needing to be involved in simplification of the system. And it is research-based, because we didn't just make up their characteristics. It really is reflective of the population as a whole in Minnesota. And we actually developed 6 of them. These are just the 3 I decided to show. But that's a way to probe the system, rather than coming in and doing a briefing on the demographics of the clients with lots of bullets and charts about those, because that isn't actually helping. We decided to take an approach that's more about probing the system on an emotional level informed by research. Another way of probing the system is to do something called scenario planning. And scenario planning, I pulled this example. This is from a cohort member a couple of years ago. Scenario planning, one of the books up here is about it, is basically a situation where you take the current reality and you project into the future, usually 4 alternatives. One is kind of the status quo. One is things are going to get really bad, things are going to get moderately bad, and things are going to get really good. and you actually write out those scenarios, and then you plan as a system as if those scenarios are going to happen. So in my field, some foundations have funded things where people sit down and try to do community planning for children and families based on scenarios. But this energy one I thought was a really interesting example. So it's Great River Energy, which is a electricity cooperative in Minnesota. It pulls resources and electricity transmission from all of these counties. And their question is really about how do we create reliable and cost-effective ways to create and transmit the energy with the least impact on the environment. That's a question we all care about. But they can't know a bunch of things. They can't know, for example, what's the supply, because electricity comes from a lot of different sources. Comes from coal, comes from natural gas, comes from nuclear, comes from a lot of different sources. So the demand and the supply are unknowable, because the demand side, are people going to have more gadgets, less gadgets? How does it change during the time of year? Some of it can be predicted, but there is a real degree of uncertainty around that. And then an additional dimension of this is that they really don't know how the fuel forecasts and what the costs will be connected to the supply of the different sources of electricity. And so they do projections that are worst case scenario, moderately case scenario, current conditions the same, and a really good scenario. And they do projections like this. And so to do scenario planning, you break it down into some of the big factors that are important. You actually write out the story of the current trend of the supply and demand of electricity staying the same. And then you think through, okay, what's it going to mean about where we're going to site new coal processing or natural gas processing plants? Because then they have to build those facilities. And it depends, everything depends upon the assumptions that you make going into the model. Other things, of course, impact it, like the environment, game-changing technologies that could happen. And for them, it's the actual membership of who's in the electrical cooperative. Have any of you ever used scenario planning in your work? Tell us the context, Dave.
Nuclear reactor accidents.
And how did you do it?
Much like this, quite frankly, because it's an energy generated system, and then you have to figure out where are all the different inputs that go into making this happen, and then what are all the impacts on what could go. A good example is if you have an accident, which way, where are the affected areas? Well, that's dependent upon a lot of different things that you have to make projections on, but what do you know about the wind? Will the wind be, worst case, best case? Will it be in between case? Et cetera, et cetera. And so there's models that predict that, and then ultimately that comes into telling a story and implications and how you go and combat that. So emergency response, big picture, specifically reactor accident.
I saw another hand. Who else has used it?
We used it for emergency planning for the Washington football game, thinking through potential security and emergency risks, bomb threat, huge protests, shut down the game, shut down transit. And we mapped out both very technical responses and which stakeholders needed to be involved, but also from a communication standpoint. In each instance, who would be the lead spokesperson? What would be the key messages that we would need to communicate in that instance? Who needs to be informed that something is happening?
Yeah. One more example.
Ebola planning. I wasn't in it, it was more on the periphery, but it was things like
At Mayo.
Right, at Mayo. Yes. So if we have a few patients coming in, they're coming through the health systems, but then they come into Mayo Clinic Rochester, what will the community reaction be? How will the hotels react? Who's going to house out the nurses and doctors that have treated people with Ebola because they can't go home to their families. Same thing. I mean, it's kind of a disaster.
Jodi, it seems to me that you could use something like this one, even like when we look at our policy case analysis. And we'd have three different solution options. And we're looking at, what are the implications surrounding each of those.
You could, I think that when these are done in this example, the nuclear example, this example, they're trying to be a leadership or management tool that people to use to help get a complex system ready. Okay? So that's why it's a probe. It's a probe to say, do we have the right level of rules in the system and not too much? Okay? So your example is an interesting one because you were using it to think through what's our decision rule in terms of media, for example. If something horrible happens, who needs to be the one to step up, right? You were trying to create enough cognitive agreement among the players so that, God forbid, if there's a crisis, if there's a breakdown in a nuclear reactor, that people know what to do. So it's a little different, Kevin, than just thinking through alternatives.
But in terms of projecting out, is where I was trying to work with that.
Yes, but when the scenario planning probe is used, it's very systematic for each dimension. So it's to say, okay, the current trend, we know what the environment is. You literally go through, like you see here, 7 or 8 things, and then you vary them. Is that what you did in the nuclear example?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then you'd have a situation where, okay, if the bottom falls out of energy, the political and economic environment totally falls apart. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And then you come to the implications and the outcomes. So it's kind of a deeper dive than what we're asking you all to do in those memos, where we're just really thinking about alternatives and consequences. Peggy, you have been quiet through our conversation. I was going to call on you earlier when you were sitting there when we were talking about complex systems. Explain that for us.
Oh, well, what I was doing is my knee hurts. I have to have a knee replacement. So I was sitting down, listening, and writing the notes from it because I find it really fascinating. How the difference, and I was trying to think of different systems and how one would label them, and I am very familiar with scenario analysis because particularly in the financial world, we do it all the time with regular sets of scenarios, shocks, up and down the interest rate curve. After the 2008 crisis, we did a whole bunch of variables, Fed dries up lending at the window, a bunch of different things. And our customers respond in a certain way. If you have $1 trillion balance sheet and you have to deliver cash to every customer at your ATM, how do all those various shocks impact your ability to continue to deliver and meet your financial ratios?
So the scenario planning is often a way of probing a system where the data is knowable and the data has been shown to drive human behavior, okay? So in projecting energy or preventing nuclear problems or financial issues or Ebola, you are in a system where people believe that data should and potentially could drive a response. In a situation where there may be a terrorist attack or some such crisis, or a system that I'm trying to work in, this kind of analysis would actually probably, done too detailed, make the system not actually able to respond, right? So that's why, in our case, we're using this kind of probe. Because in this system, that is really fairly chaotic, I need to get people to focus on a few key attractors to reorient and simplify the system. And so when you're thinking about what tools you can use, remember they always have to connect to the way your system works. What's the values, what's the information, what's the things that are legitimate to that system.
It makes me think about the vision board of Timmy, and she has this vision board that illustrates this goal, and it's like this. This
So-
personas.
Keep talking. So for you, the personas are like that?
Maybe I have the link to have this objective. What is your objective? Is to serve this person. It's your goal. And that's remembering the vision board of what Timmy did to motivate herself to envision his goals, and maybe it's part of it.
Because the other thing, today's vision board was a story, right? As you're saying, it was a story, represented in a way that was compelling. That's what the personas tried to do. Another probe that people talk about a lot in systems is storytelling. Because and then you think, okay, what's going on here? What's going on here?
Isn't this just really all tapping into purpose?
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Purpose.
What was the question?
She said, isn't probing systems, techniques for probing systems, isn't that just a way of tapping into purpose? And I stopped to think. I think that's right. And that's why, as we were talking yesterday, I think it's related to this downward part of the U. It's about seeing deeper. It's about understanding what does the system care about deeper.
Well, I challenge that a little bit.
Please.
Because to me, systems get built up over time, and whatever its original purpose was may have been lost. What you're doing with the probe is tapping into it to see what functions, what the response is to it, to go back to its original purpose, which was to serve the people that it was intended to serve.
Yes, and I think that was the nature of my response. It's a deeper attention to the purpose. It's
That's what a probe
does.
The purpose of a probe is to uncover
the deeper purpose of the system. I actually think that's also true here. When you're thinking about this example or the nuclear example that Dave brought, it's about what are the systems what are the functions within our system that we must have? Because if there's a meltdown, we must have those procedures clear. The other things, the other parts of the manual that's built up over time, we can throw out. But these are the essential parts. So I think, Kathy, rather than just blowing up the system, it's probing it to figure out what's the essential thing connected to the deeper purpose.
And I'm sorry.
When you look at these various quadrants,
Descriptors of the system. Yeah.
is there a conversation about how there is crossover and clarity? You just said something that the whole time we've been having this conversation, I woke up this morning to the analysis on CNN of what happened in Paris. And my thought was that it was really simple. 4 guys got together and decided we're going to cause all this chaos or whatever it was that they did. It was really, really simple. And we are complicating it and making it complex in terms of how we analyze it, because we analyze it from our perspective. So what's the motive that's causing them to do this? And how could, so anyways, I was just wondering if there ever is, from a leadership perspective, to really look across the polarities within this to know how to respond when you are, in this instance, looking at something that I believe is really simple. I don't think it's as complex as we're making it. And the response to it, I think, is more complex than it should be. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you said something, and that's what I've been sitting here thinking the whole time, trying to make sense of this.
A lot of times people will talk about how there's the play between these two. That often if there's chaos, the reaction of many conventional leaders is to reduce it to something simple. Clamp down the rules, and this is how we're going to handle it. Because this is so terrifying, right? And that also there's this play here, which is because most of us have been trained to respond to these kind of systemic problems, that we will pull things that actually are more complex, that don't have the, because when Joan's comments today I thought were really interesting. She's like, yeah, I know what we're doing. This is my work life. She's used to seeing complexity. It doesn't scare her. And she knows that there's things she's going to win and things she's going to lose, but there is some kind of logic pattern that she can feel comfortable in. Again, many artists are here, just generally, these kinds of system pieces. Some of you who are artists talked about that in relation to the youth. But sometimes it's that we pull things here too quickly. But back to prose.
Well, I just wanted to say to Renee that our world cannot be divided into 4 quadrants and easily explained. It's just one way of understanding that might help us better understand.
I get that.
And then, but in my world, probing is from a community organizing perspective, probing is often called like a one-on-one, and that might be it might be an actual one-on-one with the community leader, where you're pushing them, and you're pushing them. I mean, it might be intellectually, it might be emotionally, it might be their values to see, for them to show themselves and see who they are. Or it might be a group of leaders going to meet with a political decision maker, or a public agency staff person, where you're really you're pushing them with their questions to either make a commitment, and there's very structured scripts to that. You could actually do a good cop, bad cop thing, where you're really kind of messing with them. So one person comes down really hard on them, the other person takes it easy on them, because you're testing their reaction. Because then you're going to go back to your group and you're going to shift and change your analysis. You're going to change your strategy to achieve your goals based on what you learn.
You're going to, what they call sense. You're going to interpret.
Yep.
Right? You're going to presence, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? The reason you probe in complex systems is that you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
She doesn't know what's going to happen when she's going to take a proposal to this person at the Met Council. We don't know what's going to happen when we are thinking about electricity transmission in 5 years. We don't know what's going to happen when the policy people in the welfare system say they want this client-centered system. The system has absolutely no way to respond. So you have to probe to generate some kind of reaction to then inform your strategy. Yep. So there are some tools for that, the sensing, the analyzing complex system. And again, there are literally hundreds. I pulled out some that I've both been using and that I thought were helpful. And I think I'm still going to do the exercise. Again, you see engaging the system. That is because even when Joan just told her example, it's not that Joan goes back from the visit by herself. She goes back potentially to either a core group or a steering committee. Sometimes you can have that be representative of the system. So maybe there's a politician on it, maybe there's a couple of community people on it. Oftentimes you have to engage with other people to figure out and interpret what's going on, right? Again, we've been going through those techniques again and again. Then there is a technique that is called systems dynamic mapping, visual mapping, and it is really a way to understand cause and effect relationships visually. And my colleague John Bryson here at Minnesota has developed it. There's actually a 1-credit course you can take. But I thought it might be useful to do this in relation to your action learning project to date. What you're trying to do is create a visual map for yourself about the complex cause and effect relationships in the experiences you've had and where they could go. It is going to look like this. This happens to be the one that, I just took it from John's book. It's about his move to a place called Bridgewater. And what you do is you start first by brainstorming. What were the things that caused me to, in this case, move to my new house? Or what caused an organization to have this kind of desirable event, let's say, if you're planning a big event for your agency. Or if you are trying to, maybe I'll use the same example of Great River Energy. If we need to build a new natural gas transmission place, and you go think backward to what contributed to it and what will result from it. So this technique, I think, gets to what Kevin was saying earlier. It could be something you could use in your policy analysis to figure out what are the unintended or potential consequences of any recommendation that I have. But it's trying to help people to see the multiple things that are contributing to an outcome and could result from the outcome. Okay? So I have a little handout, but yes?
I took this course, me and Rajesh took this course.
Yes.
So what my observation was that on a personal task level, this is not something great, but for organizational, it's something great.
So right, the example here happens to be personal. You're saying even for the action learning project, you think it wouldn't work?
Then it's something big. For big organization, that's great.
Jodi? Jodi, if I could respond.
Yeah.
So I took Bryson's strategic planning this past semester, and he actually had us doing for a personal goal. And I'm not smart, but I could be able to
Okay, so I have two different probes coming at me right now. Part of what I wanted to do So we have conflicting information about whether or not this will be helpful at a personal level. I think that for the purpose that because you haven't all taken the class, many of you have. These are impossible to look at on a PowerPoint. When John first kept showing me this, I thought this is ridiculous. Why would this in any way be helpful? And then I did one and I thought, you know what, it actually is helpful. Because it's just a way to create a visual representation of the things that are creating a situation and what could come out of it. It helps you see the pattern like we experienced in the middle of the room. It gives you a way to kind of put your arms around it and sense how to respond. Okay? So what I was thinking we would do is to do these steps for your action learning project. And I had thought we would have time, but I think we don't, to do some debriefing of the visual diagram that you create with your action learning project member. So I have brought for you different sizes of paper and small Post-it notes. Because one of the things that's useful is to not be too committed when you start to the arrangement of the ideas, but to really be able to brainstorm them. So as suggested on here, start by brainstorming what are some of the things, the activities that you have done in the context of your action learning project, and then arrange them. Think about how each one came to be, and then what happened. And just start kind of brainstorming it. And then think about how to arrange it visually, because part of what you're trying to show is that, are there things that you've hit that are these strange attractors that actually have been driving part of your learning experience and you weren't even aware of it? Are there things that could come out if you just changed your behavior a little bit. So whenever you are ready, and I'll circulate and answer questions, just walk through the directions on the handout of thinking about what are the activities, how do they come to happen, what might result from them. And then the questions that I thought would be helpful is, you know, what do you learn from trying to sense or analyze this system in this way? And where has the activity been driving? Because that might be a place that in a natural system you'd reinvest. So let's try it and see in 25 minutes whether or not we get something useful out of it. We have competing evidence about that. Can it be used individually? Can it not? But let's see, because it will be more useful than just trying to analyze John's moving into his new house. That's not very helpful. You can use the very large pieces of paper if you like, the very small, grab different colors.
These are district-wide versus individual.
Yeah, that's
Individually. You can do really big. You want this?
Yes, I do.
I don't want to. I'm similar with Oh, I really do. You get that fear thing down perfectly. Oh, that's it. Yeah. You do. You just get a Big J, I stand in line.
This is gonna involve me. I'm having a hard time saying vertical at the moment.
All right, Big J.
Lori has an inflated vision of herself.
Who needs to make me
Say self-short, Lori, fill it up.
need to make pictures right? Okay, okay.
Right. Yeah.
We started by organizing our work.
This is supposed to be at an IRS level, at the level of activity.
Aaron, I thought you were doing yourself there. I'm like, wow.
That actually would work.
I know it would. Sorry, you're making me giggle this afternoon. I know.
Heidi stole the blue ones too. Lori, let her. Yeah. Right there. Hey, Lori. And Lori.
Another color.
This here is this, just other than that color and the next
Part of